You'd think Captain Mordecai Ironhook Draven and his black crew aboard the Crimson Widow feared cannon fire, Navy warships, or enemy blades, but know what haunted them most wasn't gold or gunpowder? It was something deceptively simple. Clean drinking water. Back in the early 1700s, ships could stockpile enough salted beef and moldy hardtack to feed a crew for months. But water? That turned foul quicker than you could say raise the anchor. Stored in sun-baked wooden barrels deep in the ship's belly, it didn't take long for the clear liquid to transform into a putrid soup crawling with bacteria and algae. In the brutal Caribbean heat, every black pirate on the Crimson Widow needed at least a gallon of water a day just to survive. Multiply that by 50 men, and you've got a demand of 50 gallons per day, more precious than gold doubloons. Captain Mordecai often said, "We can plunder a fleet, but if we run dry, even the richest chest won't save our throats." Desperation brewed danger. When their barrels ran dry, some of the younger pirates, like Ezra Threetooth, foolishly turned to the sea itself, scooping up handfuls of glistening salt water and gulping it down between coughs. A bad move. Seawater is poison in disguise with over 3.5% salt content. It forces the kidneys into overdrive, making the body lose more water than it gains. A cruel irony. One tale still circulates in whispers. The Crimson Widow had been drifting for 5 rainless days. Their stores nearly gone, a few pirates tried mixing seawater with stale wine, hoping the alcohol would neutralize the salt. Didn't the result? Violent sickness, worse dehydration, vomiting that left the deck slippery and stained. Mordecai stood over the wreckage of his crew's mistake, jaw clenched. "You don't fix poison with poison," he growled, kicking over a barrel. The sea may have glittered under the sun before the Crimson Widow and its thirsty black crew shimmered like a cruel mirage, a vast desert of undrinkable water. Little did they know, surviving at sea wasn't about maps or muskets. It was about mastering thirst. Captain Mordecai Draven had faced hurricanes, betrayals, and cannon fire, but nothing turned his stomach like the smell wafting up from the ship's hold when the water went bad down in the damp, creaking belly of the Crimson Widow, nestled between gunpowder crates and stolen silks, sat the lifeblood of the ship, massive wooden barrels. Not the kind you'd toast with in a tavern. These were hogsheads, each one holding over 60 gallons of water. Mordecai's crew needed about 30 of them just to last a month at sea. That's nearly 2,000 gallons, sloshing and fermenting beneath their boots. But the barrels were traitors in disguise. The heat, the humidity, the rolling motion. It created a swampy stew inside each barrel, paradise for bacteria. After just a couple of weeks, water turned cloudy, sour, and alive with squirming things. The pirates started calling it live water. One swig, and you'd feel like a colony of worms was dancing down your throat. Tyrese half-jaw. The ship's quartermaster once cracked open a barrel and nearly vomited on the spot. "Cap'n," he said, holding up a mug of thick green sludge, "this ain't water, it's witch's brew." But the crew didn't have the luxury of pouring it out. Every drop mattered, so they had to get clever. That's when Captain Mordecai remembered a trick he'd learned from an old black mariner in Kingston Char. The inside of the barrel. They set fire to the inner surface, burning it black. The result? A layer of charcoal acting like a natural filter, and it worked. The new water barrels lasted longer, tasted cleaner. But that wasn't all. Zola Goldfang, one of the few women aboard, had her own idea. "Drop a silver coin in the barrel," she told Mordecai. "Old African magic. Purifies it. Magic or not, the coins stayed in. Curiously, the water stayed fresher. No one aboard knew about bacteria or antiseptics. But what Zola did instinctively was grounded in truths. Silver kills bacteria. Still, paranoia ruled. The crew started inspecting barrels like treasure chests. One sailor even carved a small X on the safe ones for extra lucky, said. Then came the problem of sealing. If the barrels weren't tight, rot crept in faster. Mordecai experimented with tar, resin, even beeswax, stolen from an abandoned sugar plantation. And as always, secrecy was sacred. Mordecai mixed the sealing concoction himself, sending the crew above deck so they wouldn't see his recipe. Treated it like gold. When a British warship finally captured the Crimson Widow months later, the Royal Navy offered Mordecai clemency in exchange for his barrel sealing formula. He laughed in their faces, and he took the secret to the gallows, because, for black pirates in the heat of the Caribbean, it wasn't just the sword or the storm that threatened survival. It was the invisible war in every barrel below decka. War between freshness and decay. The skies above the Crimson Widow had long been seen as both a curse and a blessing. When dark clouds gathered on the horizon, the younger crew members stiffened with fear. But the veterans, they smiled, because two pirates like Captain Mordecai Draven and his black crew, rain wasn't a threat, was salvation. The moment storm clouds began to roll in, the entire ship transformed like clockwork. Shouts echoed, ropes flew, sails adjusted. The once bloodthirsty pirates became frantic water catchers, scrambling like children under a broken fountain. Tyrese Halfjaw would yell, "Positions, we ain't missing a drop this time." And just like that, the deck became a water-catching miracle. The massive canvas sails normally used to catch the wind were re-angled and tilted to perfection. They called it channeling the rain. Forward sails, which caught cleaner water with less bird droppings, were the most coveted. Pirates even bickered over which sails they got to handle, like greedy merchants. Fighting over silk, but the cleverness didn't stop there. Every inch of the ship served a purpose. Wooden railings became gutters. The seams in the deck, carved into channels by Zola Goldfang herself with a stolen Spanish knife, guiding water straight into open barrels. Some pirates stuffed the ends of these grooves with cloth to create makeshift filters. And then there were the hats. Oh, the hats. Nothing funnier than seeing rough, hardened black pirates, many with gold teeth and scars running around bare-chested, holding their hats upside down, catching rain like schoolboys. Some stripped off their shirts, soaked them in rain, twisted the fabric out into buckets. One of the younger deckhands, Malik Stormfoot, once tried using his boots. When Captain Mordecai saw him pouring water from his muddy shoes into the barrel, he gave him a look that could cut through bone. "You best hope no one tastes your foot-flavored brew," he growled. There was a ritual to it all. The crew knew not to collect the first few minutes of rainfall. That water was dirty washed, the sails of weeks' worth of salt and bird filth. They called it giving the ship her bath. Once the first rush passed, they'd yell out, "Clean, pour," and the real harvesting began. One day they were caught in a massive storm just east of Tortuga. For 3 straight hours it poured so heavily that the barrels overflowed. The men cheered louder than they had for any stolen chest of Spanish gold. Mordecai's arms folded. "Watch the sky. Let the sea take what it wants," he muttered. "But not our thirst." That night, they celebrated with what they called a rain feast. Nothing but full mugs of clean water and soggy laughter. No rum, no meat. Just life in its purest liquid form. Because in a world ruled by the sea, those who survived weren't the strongest or the cruelest. They were the ones who could dance in the storm. And drink it. Captain Mordecai Draven had always said, "There's 2 kinds of treasure, lads. The kind that shines, and the kind that saves." He was talking about water. When the rain clouds failed them, and the barrels ran dry, the Crimson Widow would turn its crimson sails toward land. Not for gold, not for glory, but for fresh water. Because without it, even the fiercest black pirate crew became nothing more than drifting bones in the ocean. Forget buried treasure maps. The most precious parchment in Mordecai's cabin was a worn, hand-sketched map of freshwater springs and rivers scattered across the Caribbean, scribbled by generations of pirates passed hand to hand. It was their lifeline, but maps only got you close to actually find water. That took instinct and more than a little luck. Zola Goldfang, barefoot and sharp hide, was the crew's best water scout. "Don't look for palm trees," she'd snap. "They lie." She taught the men to seek out ferns, thick grasses, and especially morning glory. vines plants that only grew where moisture lived beneath. The crew would land about 50 paces inland, dig into the sand, and wait. Slowly, clear water would rise into the hole. These were called seepage, wells, a pirate trick so clever it seemed like sorcery. The sand filtered the salt, leaving clean, drinkable groundwater behind. Ezra Three-Tooth once asked, "How?" "You know where to dig," Zola smirked. "The earth tells you if you know how to listen." The water wasn't always cooperative. Sometimes the pirates turned to the sky not for clouds but for birds. Black parrots, herons, even noisy gulls, they all had predictable habits. Watch them fly inland at dawn or dusk, and they'd likely lead you to a stream or pool. Mordecai once followed a flock of scarlet parrots deep into a grove and found the cleanest spring he'd ever tasted. He also got dive-bombed by angry birds the whole way back. Occasionally, desperation forced them into risky decisions. One tale still echoed through the crew: a raid on a Spanish settlement in 1718, not for jewels, but for barrels of fresh water. They stormed ashore with pistols drawn, seized the casks, and then did something no one expected. They left behind a small pouch of gold coins. Even thirsty pirates got manners. Mordecai had muttered as they sailed away. Not all missions went smoothly. They once captured a local islander, hoping he'd lead them to water. Instead, he walked them in circles for 3 days until they realized he was just buying time for his village to escape. Another guide led them to a spring home to an angry crocodile. Tyrese Halfjaw still had the bite marks to prove it. After that, Mordecai made it policy to trade fairly with locals, or go it alone. The cleverest technique, though, was what Malik Stormfoot called the dew trick. At dawn, they'd dig shallow sloped pits, line them with leaves, and set containers underneath. Morning dew would collect, drip down, and drop by drop fill their cups. It wasn't much, but it was clean. And when you're choking on thirst, one drop can feel like a miracle. So while other ships chased gold across oceans, the Crimson Widow chased the secret streams that slithered beneath unknown lands. Because in the world of pirates, the smartest hunter wasn't the one with the sharpest sword. It was the one who could track the taste of water in the wind. Finding water was one thing, keeping it clean, that was a battle of its own. Down in the hold of the Crimson Widow, the barrels groaned like restless ghosts. Each was a giant hogshead, sealed with iron hoops and soaked in sea salt. But those barrels weren't just wooden containers. They were ticking time bombs of rot and ruin. Water didn't stay innocent for long. After weeks at sea, even the cleanest spring water turned murky. It grew things, tiny wiggling creatures, stringy green slime, and a stench that could knock a shark unconscious. The pirates called it live water because it looked like it might crawl out of the barrel on its own. Captain Mordecai Dravin refused to lose another drop. He ordered every barrel charred from the inside, turning the wood black with fire. The charcoal lining worked like a natural filter, slowing the rot and soaking up the stink. It wasn't pretty, but it kept the water from turning into a sea monster in a barrel. Zola Goldfang added her own touch. She dropped silver coins into the barrels, whispering an old African blessing. Some men mocked her until they realized those barrels stayed fresher, longer. None of them knew why, but science would later prove what Zola had already learned. Silver kills bacteria. Even the seams of the barrels became sacred territory. Tyrese Halfjaw became the ship's unofficial sealmaster. He brewed up his own sticky blend of tar, pine resin, beeswax, and coconut oil, a recipe so effective the water inside stayed sweet for weeks. But he was so secretive, he'd make the crew turn their backs while he applied it. Muttering under his breath like a man casting spells, when the British Navy eventually captured the Crimson Widow, they offered Tyrese a full pardon if he'd reveal the recipe. He smiled with all 3 of his remaining teeth and said, "Die thirsty." Temperature was another enemy. Water lasted longer in the coolest part of the ship, deep in the lower deck. But that deck also rolled the most with the waves, turning those heavy barrels into rumbling, wrecking balls.
Ow.
More than one sailor had a toe crushed or a rib cracked from barrels breaking loose in a storm. They tried everything to beat the heat. Wet sailcloth wraps, moldy, painting barrels white to reflect sunlight. The paint had lead in it. Sure, it preserved the water but also poisoned the drinkers, Mordecai's crew learned. The hard way. Not every clever idea is a good one. Then came the superstition phase. Some pirates believed evil spirits lived in the water, turning it sour. They held barrel blessing, ceremonies chanting, dancing, waving rum-soaked feathers over the lids. One crew even hired a self-proclaimed water witch, who secretly slipped crushed charcoal into the barrels when no one was watching. Whatever worked, Mordecai didn't care. Because when you're trapped in the heart of the ocean, sailing, under blistering sun and moonless nights, even one good barrel is worth more than a chest of emeralds. And in the shadows of the hold, among the echoes of creaking wood and groaning tides, the battle for water never stopped. The pirates of the Crimson Widow had mastered the sea, challenged nations, and outrun the gallows, but their greatest enemy was always the one they stored in the dark. Captain Mordecai Draven once said, "When death sails beside you, even your hat becomes a water filter." He wasn't joking. When the water in the Crimson Widow's barrels turned green and alive, the crew didn't give up, they got desperate. In desperation, that's when pirates became inventors. The simplest solution came first: cloth filtering. The crew stretched scraps of shirt or sailcloth, whatever passed, for clean over their mugs, pouring the putrid water through. It didn't kill bacteria, but it kept out the big offenders: worms, algae, things that swam. Zola Goldfang once held up a soaked filter, green and slimy, and said, "Looks like the ocean threw up on my blouse." But they kept drinking. Then came the copycats' ideas stolen from islanders and coastal tribes. Mordecai had seen how fresh water trickled through layers of sand and stone near riverbanks. So his crew tried building their own mini-filtration systems. They stacked broken pottery, crushed coral, sand, and even shards of seashell necklaces into makeshift funnels. One pirate swore filtering water through smashed pearls made it taste luxurious. Zola smacked him on the back of the head and called it a waste of jewelry on your filthy throat. They tried boiling seawater to hanging damp cloths over the steam, waiting for condensation to soak the fabric. Then they'd wring it out into empty bottles. Technically, it worked, but it took a full gallon of firewood to produce a cup of water. At that rate, they'd be thirsty and fireless within a day. Malik Stormfoot had the worst idea of them all. He tried filtering bad water through tobacco leaves, thinking it would kill the germs. All it did was make the water taste like swamp smoke and ashes. Mordecai spat out his sip and nearly threw Malik overboard. "Only thing you killed," he growled, "was my will to live." Surprisingly, citrus fruits turned out to be a stroke of genius. When the pirates had lemons, limes, or oranges, usually stolen from merchant ships, they squeezed them into the filtered water. It made the taste bearable, but more importantly, the acidity helped kill off some bacteria. They didn't know it back then, but the vitamin C also kept scurvy at bay. One day, Zola made a jug of what she called pirate lemonade. It was murky, sour, and barely drinkable, but it was also the reason their gums didn't rot. Sometimes, though, the smartest solution was patience. When the water turned foul, Mordecai ordered it poured into clean, clear glass bottles, rare loot from Spanish ships. Left untouched for hours, the sediment would settle to the bottom. They called it sleeping water, late long enough, and the top layer became drinkable again. Malik once joked, "Guess the water just needed a nap." But even among all the hacks, filters, tricks, and madness, one thing became clear aboard the Crimson Widow. Innovation was born from thirst, in a world with no science labs. No filters and no fresh taps. Just salt, sweat, and survival black. Pirates didn't just sail the seas, they outsmarted them. By the time the last barrel turned sour and even sleeping water refused to settle, Captain Mordecai Draven gave the nod. It was time to unleash the grog. Most landfolk think pirates just drank rum because they loved the buzz. But on the Crimson Widow, rum wasn't a luxury, it was a lifeline. When water went bad and filters failed, rum turned foul liquid into something drinkable. And when mixed with lime, it became their closest thing to medicine. Tyrese Halfjaw, called it liquid hope. Malik Stormfoot called it juice of the gods. Zola Goldfang just called it better than death. The recipe was simple. 1 part rum, 4 parts water, a squeeze of lime. If they had it, maybe a pinch of spice nutmeg, cinnamon, or mint if the cook was feeling creative. Shake. Pass it. Pray it doesn't kill you. This odd blend didn't just mask the taste of bad water. It purified it, thanks to the alcohol killing off bacteria. The lime helped prevent scurvy, and the water stayed safer longer than if it sat alone. But grog wasn't just to drink it became a way of life, Captain. Mordecai enforced strict grog rations, measured down to the sip. Too much, and the crew got reckless. It's too little, and they started hoarding water. So he made it law. 1 ration a day, no exceptions. One evening, a pirate named Kojo Redtooth claimed he was twice as thirsty as any man alive and demanded a second mug. Mordecai stared him down. Then you can be twice as thirsty with your 1 ration, he said, not blinking. The crew scheduled their lives around grog. Attacks waited until after grog time. Disputes weren't settled until every man had his mug. It was ritual, discipline, and survival all in one. Each crew had its own twist. One added sugar, another threw in cloves. Zola once crushed mint leaves into hers and called it a Caribbean cocktail. Mordecai didn't mind as long as it kept them from mutiny. Because yes, grog mutinies were real. On a scorching August day, Mordecai tried watering down the grog more than usual to stretch supplies. The crew nearly revolted. Swords were drawn. Threats flew. In the end, he restored the mix and locked up the extra rum. Lesson learned. But perhaps the strangest thing about grog wasn't the drink itself. It was the discipline it inspired. From rum-soaked mugs came order, unity, even peace. Grog turned the Crimson Widow from a band of rogue pirates into a crew that operated like clockwork. It was their drink, their medicine, their bond, and sometimes, in the middle of a moonless night, Mordecai would sit quietly on the stern, sipping his ration with Zola nearby and say, "Funny how the sea breaks a man, and grog puts him back together." Because in the end, water kept them alive, but grog gave them reason to survive. Long after the Crimson Widow vanished from Caribbean waters, the stories remained not just of stolen gold or sea battles, but of how Captain Mordecai Draven and his black crew outwitted the ocean's cruelest trick, thirst. Because in truth, the sea doesn't kill with storms or sharks, it kills slowly, with dry tongues and empty barrels. And yet, these pirates survived, with charred barrels, silver coins, and secret sealing pastes, with rain rituals, bird watching, and digging seepage, wells into sandy shores, with cloth filters, crushed coral, lime juice, and the miracle of grog. Every tool was improvised. Every trick was born out of necessity. They turned their sails into rain catchers, their shirts into filters, their rum into medicine, their routines into discipline, and their desperation into invention. Some say the pirates were brutes, wild, lawless, reckless. But aboard the Crimson Widow, they were engineers, meteorologists, and chemists, whether they knew it or not. They read cloud patterns like sacred texts. They watched seabirds the way generals study maps. They stored knowledge and whispered stories, passed from scarred lips to eager ears. Their survival was not just about fighting, it was about thinking. Even the Royal Navy, with its rules and rank, couldn't match the adaptability of Mordecai's crew. One captured sailor once said they could turn a hurricane into a harvest and a rotten barrel into hope. But not every lesson was written in ink. The best water maps weren't drawn, they were memorized. The best filters weren't built, they were imagined. And the best strategies didn't come from books, they came from the gut feeling that told a pirate where to dig, what to boil, and when to dance beneath a storm. The ocean tested them every day, but it never broke them. And that's the real story. Not just of gold or glory, but of resourcefulness, resilience, and a kind of rough, sea-bitten brilliance that modern sailors still envy. So the next time you turn on a faucet or sip from a bottle without a second thought, remember this. Somewhere in the annals of the sea, A ship called the Crimson Widow once sailed with barrels full of mystery, mugs full of rum, and minds full of genius, and every drop they drank, they earned it.